Okay, so for the last video here, I want to talk about a couple things. First off, I want to talk about this concept of refugia. And refugia, if you're not familiar, is basically referring to locations that support isolated populations of once widespread species. So you have these areas that are isolated, that are probably more suitable habitat than what the surrounding environments are, and certain species are able to survive in these little pockets of isolated areas and survive in otherwise climates that probably wouldn't allow them to survive. We're usually talking about these in the context of expanding glaciers, which is why we're talking about this now. And sometimes you might have areas where the elevation is higher than the surrounding areas, and maybe areas that don't freeze over. So you end up with ice-free areas that can serve as refugia and basically can serve as either refugia or migration corridors during glacial advancement. And if we look at the last glacial advancement, when the Laurentine ice sheet was stretching down over North America, there was a few areas. There was a driftless area. That's usually how that's referred to. There are some other areas where people have been speculating may have been some refugia. There was the Beringia refugium, which we can talk about a little bit more specifically. This whole area, we just talked about the sea level, the changing sea level, and how there were areas that were exposed. And some of these areas may have been served as refugia. So then basically there were some studies that indicate that the high frequency of endemic plant species in central Alaska may indicate that part of it remained unglaciated during the Pleistocene. So basically you're seeing these contours represent how many endemic species there were. And endemic, I don't think we covered this, but endemic species just mean they were species that are only located there. They're only found in those areas. And there was a high proportion of them in central, and then you sort of get this decreasing levels of endemic species as you move away from this central portion. And that may indicate that portions of this area didn't freeze over, wasn't covered with glaciers during portions of the Pleistocene. There were other areas of refugia, and so here we're seeing some refugia in the Iberian, Italian, and Balkan peninsulas during the Pleistocene, so you can sort of see those areas outlined. Some of these may have been areas next to glaciers that didn't freeze over, or just something about the topography that caused them to not freeze over, but there were some areas that species were able to survive, and there's been fossils and things, and there's a reading that I have for you at the end of this that takes place in some of these, but I'll get to that in a second. Okay, last thing I want to talk about here is the extinctions, because there's some important trends in extinctions during the Pleistocene. So specifically relating to megafauna, and megafauna are these really they're really cool, large mammals that were widespread across most, if not all, major land masses except Antarctica up until the early Holocene. So there were these massive mammals that we don't have anymore, and basically this has to do with some patterns with extinction. And so if we look at past extinctions, and if we compare that to body size, we see that extinctions of mammals during the late Pleistocene were strongly biased towards large species. So here we're looking at the percentage of groups going extinct by body size. And you can see, like, once you get to these higher body sizes, a much higher percentage are going extinct compared to the lower ones. And it really, we see this trend in North America, Eurasia, South America, Africa, and Australia. So it's pretty much all over the place. You see this, and these are just sort of showing you the relative sort of graphical representation of that, where these actually refer to, like, these little drawings refer to actual organisms, but the red ones were Pleistocene, Holocene extinctions, and the pink were things that have gone extinct since during European colonization, and the white are ones that are extant, basically non-endangered species that still exist now. And you're seeing like basically it's the smaller ones still exist now. It's the large ones that overwhelmingly went extinct, and to a lesser extent went extinct during the Pleistocene, and to a lesser extent went extinct during European colonization. So a strong bias towards larger organisms going extinct during that time period. And what was going on here is basically us humans. Um, the extinction, while these megafauna went extinct all over the globe, you do not see that the time periods in which they go extinct was not the same. So here you're seeing in the parentheses like the time of the collapse of megafauna populations and the time in which humans migrated to these areas. And so humans are moving around at different time periods, and that matches up really well with when we see the collapse of these megafaunal populations. So basically, we come in when humans come in large numbers, and they and hunt these organisms for obviously for food, but then also kill them because they may represent competition for other food or danger to themselves. So lots of reasons why humans contributed to that, but basically that's what's going on. Wherever humans moved into these areas, you see these collapse in megafaunal populations. Okay, so I'm going to finish up here, and there's one more reading. It's actually a pretty cool reading. It's about Neanderthals, and it's this article that sort of combines scientific analysis with artistic renderings of past environments. So it's pretty interesting. It's a short little read, so read through that. And yeah, if I was going to do just a really quick sum up what's going on, what we talked about here. During the Pleistocene, the climate cycle between glacial and interglacial periods, we talked about that. The changing climate was driven by a combination of factors that influence global temperature. We talked about all of those. And then we saw some of the different species responses to the changing climate and the glacial cycles and how they respond in different ways. So basically the main points there to synthesize what we talked about. So keep working your way through these. Well, this is the last video, so keep working your way through and do that reading, and then finish up the module, and I will see you next week in next week's videos.